So what I want you to consider here today is what role will Bitcoin and digital currencies in general play in the global emergence of payment systems. Because here we are, 20 years into the internet world, a global connected community, and this is the state of the art. This I took the other day at a sushi restaurant. There's 4 terminals here, all of them from different banks. None of them talk to the same systems, and that's the state of the art in payments. So you have a broken system, and we're here looking at an opportunity where you could literally save hundreds of billions of dollars by improving this and centralizing with a single currency. Because that's the best way to bring down barriers. You look at the euro, and you look at how it's unified a lot of the currency across Europe, and we have the same opportunity here. So, but is this possible? Can we trust Bitcoin? I mean, we're going to blindly send a transmission over a wire. So none of this is really possible without some sort of a trust system and some sort of transparency. And let's take Uber, for example. If anybody's ever used Uber to get a ride instead of a taxi, where you make the request right from your smartphone, and then you see the driver who's going to pick you up in his rating and what people have said about him, and you can say, hey, this guy has 3 stars. I don't want to get in his machine. But you do if they have 5 stars. They have 5 stars. And meanwhile, the driver gets to look at you. So this trust bond is built. So what's working against that trust bond? This guy. This guy's working against the trust bond. Okay? So there's the fear economy. It's the big fear of the unregulated Bitcoin. Everybody knows that Bitcoin's used for selling drugs and trafficking humans and all kinds of bad stuff like child pornography and money laundering. And oh, did I say money laundering? Well, that only happens at Bitcoin, right? Well, actually it doesn't. In December 2012, Standard Chartered Bank was fined for $133 million of money laundering. So they're regulated, but they play by different rules? Absolutely, but they still have a problem. The same month, HSBC, part of a $1.9 billion settlement, part of it was for bulk cash transactions, where they're sending bulk cash for international crime rings, allegedly. But they settled it, nobody went to jail, sorry, we'll just pay a bunch of fines, 1.9 billion, and there we go. So what does all this mean? So I would argue that here we are, looking at social networking and the types of payments that we're talking about. Most of the people have transparency. They're on social networks, they're real true identity. So what are the adoption, what are the drivers? Some of the obvious ones, hyperinflation. You see Argentina, you see different countries where the currency, you're losing money every day, and you're looking, hey, I better move my money somewhere. So the big opportunity that I see is really the unbanked people that have never been able to participate in online shopping. There's Indonesia, 13% have bank accounts. And it's a really, really crazy low number. So all of these people can't shop online. They can't play games online. All they can do is go buy a little scratch card at the 7-Eleven, and they go back and they scratch their card off. Well, 20% of that money ends up going to the 7-Eleven, to the processor of the payment, to the guys that make the cards. All these people in the ecosystem making money. So one other point I wanted to make here is, Zimbabwe had hyperinflation, and what happened? The de facto currency quickly became the US dollar, even though it was illegal to make another currency, a foreign currency, your day-to-day currency. So let's talk about the differences here, fiat currencies, centralized and decentralized. So you have the US dollar, which 56% of the worldwide transactions happen in the US dollar. And in terms of reserves, money that other foreign countries hold in reserve, that makes up 66% are for foreign currency reserves. Second to that is the euro. Euro is about 25% of the reserves. So I want you to remember this because China's very interesting here because China would really like the RMB to be a reserve currency as well. So they're doing a lot of things to try to make that happen. And I'll get to that point in a little bit. So in terms of centralized, we have Canada coming out with a mint chip. So it's centralized. You think of it like there's a head, sort of like Napster. Remember Napster? One of the problems that they had is there was a single entity that had the directory, and so the government had a potential to go after that one spot. Well, when it's the government, then the Canadian government has taken a really, really positive position here. So it's going to be interesting to see how that evolves. Also mentioning here is e-gold. E-gold took some form for a really short period of time, and what happened was the government, FinCEN, sort of changed the rules on them. They were transacting some pretty good transactions. They got up to a couple million or so, and then FinCEN basically made a distinction between currency that's legal tender and the e-gold, and basically changed the rules in such a way that it was then illegal to trade. So the U.S. government has a lot to protect here in terms of their currency being the Federal Reserve, or the reserve for other countries. So what I want to talk about in this slide, the important point I want you to take away, is these, oops. I don't know which one you should take away from that one. What happened to my deck here? Let me see if... Oh. Had to switch to manual here for a second. Sorry about that. So eagles are emerging growth countries. So what it means is basically over a 10-year period, they're expected to contribute more to the GDP than the G6 countries. So these countries are filled with, remember the unbanked people that we were talking about? A lot of these countries have massive populations of unbanked people. So what we're looking at here is the ability to leapfrog a generation, similar to the way wireless systems came in, replacing a whole generation of wired in a lot of countries, emerging countries. So that's what's happening here with Bitcoin. I see this ability to leapfrog financial systems and banking institutions in the same way. So what's important here is you're seeing that these eagle countries, they're going to be exceeding, in 2013 for the first time, they're going to be exceeding the growth of the G6. So what this equates to is, let me get the numbers right, 44.1 trillion versus 42.7 trillion. So the numbers are getting really quite impressive here from these emerging countries. So Standard Chartered a couple years back put together a supercycle report, and basically defined a supercycle as a decades-long movement in a wide range of commodities. So they basically identified these cycles, and they're usually driven by a technological innovation or industrial revolution, or maybe perhaps a digital currency revolution. So I think what we're looking at now is the beginning of a new supercycle. And looking at China here, by the year 2030, expecting to account for 24% of the worldwide GDP. So that's a pretty impressive number. And when I start to discuss in a few slides currency wars, I'm going to get back to that point. So in order to understand the future of currency and where we think things are going, it's important to understand the past and where we've been. So what's of interest here is that back in 1200 BC, they started trading with shells. And shells became money, number one, because they were really, really difficult to counterfeit. You couldn't counterfeit a shell, but you could go to the beach and pick them up. However, if you don't have access, then that's where this goes. So you can see that the coins come about in 600 BC, and that's the first invention of coins. But I got an interesting story. I visited in 1933, some Australians came into the highlands of Papua New Guinea, which was a completely uncharted territory of people that had never seen the ocean, never seen a beach. So even in 1933, they introduced shells, and shells became the money in Papua New Guinea in 1933. So it just shows that it's really, money is what money does. Those people have a belief, and a common belief, that money is valuable. It's valuable. So that's where we find ourselves also in the Bitcoin world. And this kind of lays the groundwork for the next 10 slides. So in the next 10 slides, I'm going to talk about trends that are really important to everybody in the room. So gift economies started emerging. So these are hunter-gatherer type civilizations where you have people that are not really traveling with any material goods. They are traveling light. They're traveling with weapons. And really what happens here is they would gift anything that they had of a possession when they had to move on. And those gifts would form these bonds of obligation, a trust relationship. So what we learn from this, though, is that that's not enough to really advance a society. Same thing with the commodities. You start trading in commodities with livestock. This is the point where ownership starts, people start laying down roots in our history about 10,000 years ago, and they start trading livestock. And that's when people start thinking about their land and what land they own. And that's really where sort of things start to change here, and we start to see the early signs of capitalism. So in terms of the coin economy, again, the shells were really difficult to counterfeit, but also they started trading weapons because they had utility. And that became a currency that was issued by governments. Also, as governments started putting these currencies out, they were so easy to counterfeit that they had to put a stamp on there, and I'm going to get this right. It said, to counterfeit is death. So the penalty for counterfeiting a coin would be the death penalty. So the lesson we learned here is perception and fear those are all linked with the inflation of a currency. So then we get on to gold. So the steady adoption of gold was not as rapid as people would think, and really it got accelerated by Christopher Columbus coming to America and discovering gold there. And then the Spanish started to mine things at a very, very rapid pace. So based on this, the things about gold that were interesting was the scarcity, the divisibility, and the consensus that it had utility. So I think we're seeing a lot of those same trends here. So I briefly mentioned before the currency wars. So what currency wars are is basically a country devaluing, stick with me for a second, devaluing their own currency. So you ask, why would they devalue their own currency? And they would artificially inflate another country's currency. And they would do that so that they have trade advantage. Because now they can get more for their money because they can say, hey, their goods are so expensive because their inflation has gone up. Well, it's interesting to see that China hasn't really taken a position on Bitcoin. And one of the theories is that they haven't done so because they see it as a hedging tool in this currency war. So we move on to credit cards. And there's a lot to say about these, but this is a 50-year-old invention. So 50 years ago, they invented the credit card, and they essentially have a monopoly on the point of sale. So, you go to check out, you have, definitely dented how much cash people use, and the pressure that's, being put on by the credit card companies is pretty extreme for anyone who wants to compete with them. Does anybody have a guess as to what the #1 threat the credit card companies perceive to their processing fees? Anybody? You think it's Bitcoin? That's actually mobile. They see mobile payments and the mobile wallets as the biggest threat. So Bitcoin, I don't think, has even hit their radar yet. But you have companies like Apple who are starting to put their payment systems in. You have Android, and everybody has a phone now. So do you really think in 5 years that we're going to carry wallets around when we have everything we need electronically on our phone rather? So they really see that as a big threat. The other one is Western Union. I'm going to read this quote because they just issued this in September. Western Union does not have commercial relationships with digital currency companies or providers who buy, sell, trade in digital currencies. We will also prohibit customers from using Western Union's service if it's determined that it's associated with an e-currency transaction. Pretty big stuff, right? So they're scared. They're definitely scared. These guys don't want to lose what they have. And you can't blame them. So let's take a little broader look now at what's happened in virtual currencies. So we've had virtual currencies for years. They've just mostly been closed system. So these are some examples of loyalty points, credit card points, frequent flyer miles, coupons. And we have a company in town here called First Meta that has put together an exchange where you can exchange these one for another, or you can buy and purchase these points inside of their system. So these markets have matured. They've come about and they've evolved. But as we get into this, the lesson we're going to learn is, in these systems, they're closed. One of the things that was so attractive to me is I've built systems for years in mobile and had tokens and stars and different things inside of systems. But to me, the Holy Grail has always been something that could, transcend a single site. And I think we found it. So let's talk about consumer protection. So this is something that I haven't really seen a whole lot of conversation about consumer protection inside of the Bitcoin conversations. And this is something that we need to collectively address in the room because these are important laws. And the write-up in the paper was maybe 2 months ago or so that the Monetary Authority here in Singapore said that if you're using virtual currency like Bitcoin, that you're not protected by consumer laws or consumer protection laws. So that's an important statement for them to make. But here we have in this last week 3 or 4 heists of Bitcoins from different hosted wallet companies, and you can't tell me that there's not going to be some backlash for this. And so this is really important that we pay attention to this. And frankly, if we don't have some sort of consumer protection inside of the system or something to help us self-regulate, this isn't going to go anywhere. So what I think and what I see happening is remember back we talked about Uber and that reputation management or those rating systems? That's what I see as the new age of consumer protection, is a reputation management system that will help you determine, hey, does this company ship what they say they're going to ship? Do the descriptions actually match what I thought I was buying? Did they maybe use some false advertising and deceive me to make me, induce me to buy their product? Well, you can now read these reports of other people, what they bought, what their experience has been. And if they have a 99% rating, that's probably pretty darn good. So what is protecting the consumer in this ecosystem? So it's interesting because Bitcoin's mostly a lot of smaller transactions. Sure, there's big blocks that go out here and there for big buys and people that are speculators and holders. But by and large, it's the little fish that are collectively a big fish. And so that's what's really starting to get really interesting. So a lot of small spending, and that's really putting the big incumbents a little bit scared. So who are these buyers? So who are the people that are shopping with Bitcoin? If you look at the demographic, 45% are 25 to 34-year-olds. So 45% make up most of this curve. So this is interesting. I just went through a fundraising round, and I was talking to my father-in-law, who's 76 years old, very successful guy, has run a number of multinational companies, and very smart. But I end up giving him tech support on his computer just to give you a sense of his technology. So I'm explaining to him how this Bitcoin thing works, and he just stops me at one point. He's like, "Stop! I just think I'm of the wrong generation. I'll write you a check, but I think I'm of the wrong generation." Oh, I did it again. Make sure I'm in the right place here. Sorry about that, folks. Okay. So what are people spending on Bitcoin? So interestingly, donations and gifts. That's really, that took me by surprise too. When we did the research for these slides, I've always believed that donations would be very, very valuable. And I think one of the reasons why is you have a lot of nonprofits, NGOs that would like to get these gifts, or people that would like to give to them, but they want to be anonymous. They don't want to be seen as supporting a certain thing that they may believe, or it may be politically incorrect for them to support certain charities. And then you have other legal goods. So these are the predominant goods that are being sold here. Whereas you have the illegal, the narcotics. Those are really a fraction, and we really saw that with Silk Road coming down. That it was not even a blip in the radar of Bitcoin. So let's talk about brands. It's really important that brands protect their reputation. And there's nothing more important to a brand than their reputation. And their reputation in this new age of transparency is really about putting it all out there and telling people who you are and operating honestly. Because the second you don't, you're on Twitter and you're out somewhere on social media and on networks. And they are accountable for their actions. So if you look at what is making the big brands, the real big important brands, stay out of Bitcoin. And this is pretty much the list. Reputation risk, I think, is the highest. It's having the association at this point still has reputation risk. And that's up to all of us to sort of change that. They also think the volume isn't going to be high enough. And everyone says, wow, it's so volatile. It's been volatile this way for the last couple weeks, but we all see what happens. What goes up must come down. We know that. So the lack of knowledge and security risk, we've had a bunch of heists recently. So all these things are, we collectively are going to have to help repair and help to talk people through and still continue to be the evangelists for Bitcoin. What I really think they should be fearing? The fear of missing out. Right? Nobody wants to miss out on this. This is the greatest ride of our lives. How fun is this that we're able to watch this digital currency completely change the rules and become really the revolution that it is. So, I think the brands ought to really be thinking about, hey, I get free PR. If I just say I'm going to take Bitcoin, I'm up on every wall, all these places, you can't get free publicity like this. So to me, the brand should really be thinking that way. So that's pretty much wraps up what I had today. I'm happy to take any questions. There's my contact information here, steve@gocoin.com, Twitter handle, GoCoiner, because some guy named Gordon Coin has GoCoin. He won't give it to me. So I'm GoCoiner. But he has 4 followers. He's really killing me. Anyway, thank you very much. Any questions?